Hi everyone, this is Melissa Keller, Director of Events and Project Management for Vineyard Worship. We release new music on the first Friday of every month. Our single for April, Thin Place, draws from the Celtic Christian notion of a particular place being thin, where heaven and earth seem to meet, where God just seems to be more accessible. Featuring poignant and transcendent vocal performances by Vineyard Worship favorite Ryan Dalmore and Taylor Lenhart from Mission House, Thin Place perfectly expresses the heart and spirit of this rich theological idea, carrying the listener into the presence of God.
This is a thin place. This is where you meet with us. This is sacred space. This is where you meet with us. Holy ground we are standing on. Holy ground just by being here with you. Holy ground we are standing on. Holy ground just by being here with you.
Find Thin Place and all of our singles wherever you listen to music.
These days, I think the keys role is really difficult to define, and really depending on whose music you're trying to play or what the vibe of your own local church is, the players on your team. I think it presents a real challenge. I know it did for me, of trying to say, like, an instrument that these days could sound like any number of instruments. What do I ask this person to do where they're gonna be able to succeed, contribute to the band, but feel like there's some clear guardrails around their role? I think that's the question that I've had to figure out answers for as a worship leader, is what is the keys position in this band with this volunteer? What is their role?
Welcome to the Ferment podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. This is a Vineyard School of Worship Takeover edition, hosted by Director Mike O'Brien. Today's guest is David Pfaltzgraff from Sunday Sounds.
Welcome to another Ferment podcast takeover. My name is Mike O'Brien. I'm the director of the Vineyard School of Worship. And today's episode is all about keyboards, keyboardists, keyboard playing, Rhodes, piano, strings, Hammond, you name it. We're going to talk about these sorts of things and think about this as a resource for your keyboard player that you have now, but your future keyboard players. So keep this on file. Keep this video or podcast nearby, and every time somebody new comes around, maybe this might be helpful in helping them on-ramp to the worship stage and go from classical piano player to keyboard awesomeness on the worship team, or from some other place that they're in to maybe a more organic player, right? So just learning the keyboard arts on the worship stage. Hopefully this will be super helpful for you. So our guest today is David Pfaltzgraff. David is the founder and lead designer of SundaySounds.com. And that's a company that creates worship keys resources for local worship teams. And we're going to talk more about David and his world as we get into this. And the first thing that when I talked to David, he said, I don't want this to be a commercial. So he does have this company and it is connected with keyboard stuff, but we're going to talk about so much more, but definitely get into that resource as well. So welcome, David. So great to meet you and have you on the podcast.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So where are you coming from? This is your home office or your office?
Yeah, I'm in the home office, work out of the basement most of the time, which is nice. And I'm in Des Moines, Iowa.
Des Moines, Iowa. And Iowa is not Idaho.
Yeah, that's right. We're the other Idaho, or the alternate Ohio, whichever of those, whichever of those feels right.
That's awesome. So it's so good to have you. So do you have family there? Do you have kids? Like, what's your church world like? What's it like in Des Moines there? What's going on for you there?
Yeah, so I've been married about 10 years. My wife, Anna, and I have 3 little ones. We just had our third, a daughter, last year. Our oldest is 6, and then we've got a middle little boy who's 3. My wife and I both grew up in Iowa. We met in youth group as kids. We've known each other a long time, and actually we met in youth band. So I owe a lot in my life to being a part of worship teams, both in the spiritual world, vocationally, and then just in my personal life. And that's kind of where I've come from. So,
wow. So what have in music ministry, how'd you get involved in that? And what have been your different roles in music world and church?
Yeah, so as a kid, I played in youth band. Actually played electric guitar back then because I thought that was cooler than keyboard. But we're going to debunk that today, hopefully. And then out of high school, I went to Colorado Springs for a little while to a vocational program for worship ministry at New Life Church out in Colorado Springs.
Yep.
And then worked at a church plant in North Carolina for a couple of years. And then about the time my wife and I started having kids, we moved back to Iowa to be closer to family. So ended up on staff for several years at the church that my wife and I met at as kids, and served there and led worship and did lots of tech stuff and sound and lighting and wore a few hats, the typical worship leader thing.
Wow.
And I was doing that all the way up until starting Sunday Sounds. In the last few years, I've been able to focus my time on this.
So did you start as a keyboard player, or were you in band, or did you do guitar? Like, what other instruments or any?
Yeah, so as a young kid, my mom gave me piano lessons, or forced me to take piano lessons. I didn't really appreciate them at the time, and once I was old enough to sort of assert what I wanted to do, I picked up guitar. So I kind of ditched piano for a long while and got really into effect pedals and amps and the whole gear side of things. But then once I started leading worship and having piano players and keys players on my team, I realized wow, this was actually a really useful foundation to have. And once piano players on my team started hearing what keys players were doing on records, I realized hey, this is actually both an area where there's really cool stuff to do, but also an area of weakness in terms of what I knew how to do. So that kind of pushed me back into, well, what does it mean to contribute from the piano position or from the keyboard position in a modern worship context? How do you do that well? And how do you set up your volunteers to feel like they're contributing more than just chords or piano or whatever? So it kind of brought me full circle back around to the first instrument I learned how to play. And kind of from there, I've been stuck on it, from transitioning to guitar and then right back to the keys world for years and years now.
Wow, that's really cool. So I think of the keyboard, like historically in the church for centuries and centuries, the piano and the organ have been the centerpiece, right, of so many liturgies. And I mean, before that, it was vocal things and chanting and reciting psalms. I mean, it's been lots of different things, but for a minute it was keyboards. And for a lot of churches, traditional churches, that's still kind of the centerpiece. That piano is there and it's tuned twice a year or once a month, and it's a big deal, right?
Right.
And now we're into rock and roll worship, contemporary expressions, where the keyboard's just one part of that musical equation. What can you tell me, just as you think about the role of keyboard, these 88 keys or less, if we have little mini ones, like what is the role of keyboard in church, in singing our faith? Like what have you seen it as the role has changed and been over the years?
Yeah, well, I love you talk about the history of the instrument, of piano specifically as an instrument. And I think there was a real strong course correction away from that. And, where for a while we really didn't hear maybe much piano at all. Keys were just sort of in the background, maybe playing like a really basic pad, or maybe just no keys or piano at all on some songs. These days, I think the keys role is really difficult to define, and really depending on whose music you're trying to play, or what the vibe of your own local church is, the players on your team. I think it presents a real challenge. I know it did for me, of trying to say, like, an instrument that these days could sound like any number of instruments. What do I ask this person to do where they're going to be able to succeed, contribute to the band, but feel like there's some clear guardrails around their role? I think that's the question that I've had to figure out answers for as a worship leader, is what is the keys position in this band with this volunteer? What is their role versus any other volunteer or any other band? It's really ambiguous. I mean, a guitar is a guitar. You can make it sound like a distorted guitar or an ambient guitar or a chorused guitar. And I love guitar effects and pedals and stuff, so I'll go, nerd out on that for hours and hours. But with the piano, you've got, like you said, 88 keys. You can go in the bass range. You can pierce people's ears up in the highs. You can do all of that at the same time if you want to. So it's a tough position, and I think that some volunteers can really struggle with sort of the ability they have to set the tone, and they maybe don't feel like they're ready for that. But a lot of modern music is asking them to do that. That's kind of the challenge these days.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, I think of just, so many keyboardists like you. Like, I don't know if you were trained classically, like to play all 10 fingers and kind of even to carry that over into hymns and things like that. It can get really busy, or we start oftentimes as piano players in the place of not having a context of a band. And is that how you learned, and you were trained by your mom?
Yeah, I was classically trained, sheet music, sight reading, and then didn't really play to chord charts until I was asking my volunteers to do it as an adult. So a huge difference between, here's, this staff, you got to just directly, exactly replicate it, to here's this chord, you play it for, 2 bars, and that's the only instruction that there is.
So when you see How Great Is Our God in the first chord, you look down on this piece of paper and it says, how great, and over the word great, it has the letter C. On the guitar, I know that means C chord. So I'm going to play a C chord, and that's pretty much my only option, right? On the piano, a pianist looks at that and they say, what? What does C mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've had piano players on my team ask me that exact question. And I think the first few times I was asked, I didn't really have a good answer.
Sure.
I think you have to figure out what kind of comfort level those people on your team have with kind of running with the ball, or do they need it? They need you to kind of carry them along. Some people might really be in sort of a, just diamond on the chords, like hit the changes, kind of space. And for those people, I think just spending a little bit of time of talking about like where your chord inversions are, so for the guitar analogy, just, are you going to play like in open C, or do you want to maybe capo 5 and play it in G? That's a totally different vibe. Both simple concepts, but they really change the way that the guitar sort of adds to the mix. So you can have that conversation with a keyboard player by talking about, the voicings that are going to play. So here's a C chord. I've got my piano in front of me. And if you're going to play an F chord, or maybe let's play How Great Is Our God, right?
Sure.
So how great is our God? Sing with me, how great, A minor. Let's play that root position. F, how great. G, how great is our God.
Sure.
That's the straightest way you can play that song, with every chord being played the exact same shape, just with a different root note.
But you could have your 5-year-old get up there and go, how C, just play a C is our God. Sing with me, how A is
Right.
our God. Right? I mean, like if you wanted to do something and you were willing to be that humble and just play one note, you could do that and be out of the way. Or you could be playing an accordion and doing that, or a melodica and just be playing.
Yeah.
That's what I would tell like a cello player or a violinist that's like, I don't know what to do. It's not written down. Well, just every time you see that chord, just at least you could play that note, right? Not even talking about chords, which obviously would maybe want you to play a chord, which would be two fingers or three fingers, but
Sure.
you could just play one finger and stay out of the way, right? I mean, super basic. It's not written down, but you could survive in that way. But then, like what you just did, you played it in the bass, you played it in the middle of the keyboard. I mean, it sounds full, right? It sounds really good, and that sounds great as well. So I just wanted to say right off the top, like if you're a new keyboardist in the worship world, there's grace for you, and it's probably never going to be written down for the most part, unless we buy the chart at Easter, or we buy the chart for Christmas shoes, and it's in the right key, and you're going to have all the notes like you did.
Right.
You were in middle school talent show, but for the most part, it's going to be scary, and you're not going to know if you're winning or not, other than your worship leader just doesn't give you a dirty look, so. But it is, in that comes a lot of freedom, and it's actually a lot of fun in that. And we're just beginning the conversation in this. So, because David's talking about tones, and a lot of what Sunday Sounds does and other companies is they're introducing other tones other than just piano, right? So, David, when I walk into most churches, small churches, medium-sized churches, they have a keyboard there. And it was usually purchased in 2003. What was the keyboard of 2003? Like that gray 88
like the motif.
Yamaha, some motif, 88.
Korg Triton, something, yeah.
Korg Triton. If it was purchased in the last 5 years, and there are penny pinchers, oftentimes it's like the Yamaha plastic P something, P99,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's got little speakers on it.
Yep.
And, and any of these have like the main piano sound, and then what I call the vineyard pad, which has the piano with the vineyard pad behind it. Those are kind of the two sounds that, and you might not know this because you're kind of like in keyboard land, but that's most churches in America have that keyboard, and the person plays the piano, and sometimes they play the pad thingy in there. And that's it. Like, I'm close to the end of the conversation musically. So talk to me about gear a little bit. Like, first tell me this. What is the value of a church spending $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000 on a house keyboard? Like, is there any value in that at all?
Well, I think there's value in spending some money to give your keyboardist some flexibility to be able to more closely emulate some of the trends that we're hearing in modern worship, not just for the sake of emulation, but so that they feel a certain level of empowerment to be able to cover the bases that they're hearing. How much you need to spend, I think it's getting more and more affordable. Especially if we talk about computer-based rigs, which I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I don't think you need to spend $3,000 or $4,000 these days to be able to upgrade that 2003 era keyboard with a little bit more flexibility. And hopefully, one of the things that I think is most important is actually trying to make the rig easier to use, less threatening. I think more flexibility is good. Cool sounds is good to a point, but trying to actually make the keys position more approachable to the newcomer to your team, I think is one of the biggest wins that we as worship leaders should shoot for. It's kind of the least appealing or the least cool outcome. Is it's easier to use isn't really like a strong pitch to a music-minded person. But as a leader, it being easy to use is actually one of the most important components. And
That's good.
these days, I think that we can, with some investment, oftentimes mostly in time, just learning how this kind of technology can work for us, and investing in setting volunteers up with, here's how this works. Here's a few ways you can use it. Here's how you can be safe in using this, and then giving them the chance to try it. And then also sometimes, spending a little bit of money to invest in some new gear, whether that's a new keyboard or a new computer to plug the keyboard into, or maybe a combination of those two things. But I think you can get... Go ahead.
Yeah, so tell me two rigs. Like you said the word, what'd you say, keyboard or computer-based system, and then a non-computer-based system. So just those two worlds. The scenario I described with non-computers, there were no laptops around.
Yep.
It's just a it's just a keyboard. So in that world, if you didn't have computers, and computers are not going to happen, right?
Yep.
You could buy an 88. If you were coming to a church and you were looking at it and saying, "Oh, I'd love to serve on this team," something that would attract you, if there wasn't computers involved, would be just a nice 88 key weighted key house keyboard, right?
Yeah, like a modern, kind of workstation keyboard, like stuff from Roland, like the RD88 or, like the Nord Stage 2 or Stage 3. Those are more expensive, but there's great sounds in there, and you can definitely hang in most modern worship bands with those keyboards.
And the Nord is the red one, right?
The Nord is the red one.
Everywhere.
Yeah, everybody's seen the red one.
And is that the blank check keyboard? Like, is that the... I mean, are there more? I'm sure there's more expensive anything, but that's like top tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's got really excellent
construction, right?
Really excellent piano sounds. Really, really excellent organ. Good pads, good synths.
Okay.
And the key bed quality is really great. It feels good to play.
Cool.
Yeah. Nords are excellent. Okay. They are expensive, but they are excellent.
Sure. But that, I mean, if you spent $4,800 on a Nord 4, is there a Nord 5? I don't know. Whatever the 88 key fancy pants. I think the good one for a lot of churches is the one without the Hammond stuff, which would be the Nord piano, which I've had at a few churches. That seemed like, this seems like if you're going to spend money, this seems to be the one that has some of the basics in there, that you could add a computer to later, et cetera, et cetera. But
sure, a
keyboard like that, you spend $3,500 on, you could expect that bad boy to last a decade, right? On a stage or longer, right?
Yeah. From a construction standpoint, absolutely. And the core sounds are pretty timeless. I mean, acoustic piano, like grand piano, upright piano, those sounds are not going away. They might get dressed up differently or placed differently in the mix, but you're always going to need those. So it's a great sort of meat and potatoes keyboard rig if you've got the budget to spend and you want something that's just sort of, plug it in, turn it on, and it's ready to play. Yeah,
that's great. So it'll outlast the digital soundboard. It'll outlast a lot of the microphones. It'll outlast all your music stands for sure, but your mic stands, all your fancy pants wireless stuff. That churches spend like stupid money on wireless. I still don't completely understand what's going on, and then they buy, like the main thing, like this keyboard, they have this toy that is not, there's no computer, there's no software, there's nothing. It's just this bad piano sound. So same thing with drum set, capital investment. That's the word you want to use, worship leaders, is we need to make a capital investment. And the rich people on the finance team at your church will understand that word, capital investment, something that's going to last 20 years in this church, a Black Beauty snare drum, a Zildjian, K, Constantinople, and a Nord or a Yum, just something that's outside of the, it's real instruments. And when somebody like David walks into your church, they're going to go, what's going on here? What's happening? Hey, who bought that? Can we hang out? What's going on, right? So that's non-computer based, but the world you're living in is so cool. and financially for smaller churches or churches that maybe have the Nord, but they want to add some more sounds, more modern things. Tell us about computer-based world, which is where you live.
Yeah, so computer-based world is really just a different way to do the same thing, right? I mean, a Nord is actually just a computer on the inside, right? It just doesn't feel like it. It's not running Windows, but there's some sort of computing going on in there, right?
Yeah.
So when I talk about a computer-based rig, it's just separating the keyboard part from the computing part and using an actual computer to do the computing, the thinking, right? The making of the sounds. So, and the cool thing about that is a good chunk of the audience listening probably already owns a computer that's powerful enough to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So many people don't actually need to buy a new computer. So that's one expense already checked off.
Yep.
And then the other cool thing is that most of those old keyboards that don't sound great on their own, like you mentioned, the 2003 model, it can be connected to a computer and be used as the controller, and it's going to sound great because the computer is actually generating the sound now.
Yeah.
So a lot of churches, and this is actually how I got started in this whole world myself, was I had no budget and high aspirations for improving the quality of our keyboard sounds.
Yeah.
And I was like, every year for like a couple of years, I'd put a new keyboard in the budget request. Denied. We just don't have it this year. We're going to have to wait.
Yep.
And I was like, my volunteers really want to sound better. They really want to bring more to the table. They can hear the songs we're playing and they know that they're not sounding like that. And I really want to figure out a way to do this. And so I started looking on like internet forums for worship leaders and stuff and found people saying, you can connect any old keyboard. It doesn't matter if it's 30 years old. You can connect it to your computer and use software to play the piano sounds or the keyboard sounds that you want. And so that's when I learned about software that can do this thing like MainStage, which is one of the big softwares for worship keys players. Ableton Live is another one. And I found out for my personal church, I already had a work-issued laptop computer, and we had a junky old keyboard on stage. So I found out that all I needed to do was buy a $9 cable to connect my keyboard to my computer.
Yep.
And then I bought the software MainStage on the computer, which is $30.
Yeah.
And that changed the game for my worship team. I mean, instantly we were able to seek out and find or even create the sounds that we were hearing on records, as long as we were willing to put in the time to learn how to do that.
So that cable that you're talking about can transform your dust-ridden old keyboard, right? As long as that keyboard has a MIDI out, right? So
That's
a MIDI or MIDI cable. And so what I would search for in Amazon, and maybe we'll put this in the notes of the podcast, would be what, David? MIDI to?
So there's a couple ways to do it. The simplest and cheapest way is just a MIDI to USB cable.
Yep.
The most basic computer connector.
Yeah.
And there's tons of options, and the least expensive ones are usually only, $10 or less.
Yep.
And that was all it took. Plugged it in and got the software going, and then off to the races.
That goes from the keyboard. The fancy MIDI port plugs into the back of the old keyboard, and then does it need to go into one of these guys to interface, or it can plug just straight into the keyboard?
Depends on the keyboard. A lot of keyboards, if it has a MIDI jack on the back, that MIDI to USB cable just goes straight to your computer. Cool. Then the other side of the equation is, how do you get the audio from your computer to your soundboard or front of house or, wherever your patch bay is.
That'd be a DI box or whatever. Right?
Yeah. So
that 8-inch port coming out of your computer to a DI box, which is how your other keyboard.
Yeah, that's how we started. That's how I started at my church. It was just a simple little like headphone jack cable adapter to the direct box. Now there's more roadworthy or robust ways to do it with like an audio interface that's sort of designed for, live music. But for me, with that zero budget, that $9 cable, I just did that out of pocket, and we took off for a little while, and then once I could tell my pastor, like, hey, this is really working, then I was able to say, okay, I don't need that red keyboard, but could I get $150 to buy an audio interface? Like the barrier to entry is lower than it's ever been to be able to empower your keys players to do something more.
Wow.
Even if it's just an incremental improvement, like adding one little bit of capability at a time.
Yeah. That's amazing. So old keyboard, cable, laptop, either your personal laptop that most people have one, or some people have one, or the church buys a laptop and you strip it of all the fancy stuff and you just put the keyboard software on there, right?
Yep, that's pretty much it.
And then a cable, an 1/8-inch cable to 1/4-inch stereo, right? That goes into a couple DI boxes, and that goes to your Sound Bros, right?
Yep, that's the
and
very
the software
basic.
starts at what? Like you said, MainStage. That's an app, I guess, or it's software, right? The downloads.
Yeah, MainStage 3. If you it only runs on Mac computers, so that's kind of a caveat. You have to have a Mac. But MainStage is only $30 in the Mac App Store. And that I think, if you already own a Mac computer, is the absolute best software option available today for entry level. It's a software made by Apple themselves that's really just designed for live performance of keyboard sounds. It's exactly what church folks are doing. I think the original target market was sort of like Broadway people who are playing like, lots of complex musical parts over a 1 or 2 hour long Broadway show. And then it just kind of caught on in lots of other places, live concerts and in the church world. So it's really pretty simple to get your head around. It's really flexible. You can sort of make it look like whatever you need it to. And that's helpful because you can tell your volunteer, you have 3 buttons. Here's what they do. And then they learn how that works. And then as they get better, you can give them a little bit more control. Like, here's another sound, or here's a delay effect. You can kind of add or take away based on who's playing or how comfortable they are, how much time you have to set up, that sort of thing.
That's good. And you can always have an oh crap setup ready to go. So if the computer crashes, or like you've got somebody that's like, I hate computers, I can't deal with it, you could always go back to old school and have those cables ready to plug in to the piano. And you're just back to...
If you're still working with the 2003 and you've got space on your soundboard, just leave that keyboard connected and turn it down. And then if
the MIDI's out, like, it'll work simultaneously still with the analog symbol.
Sure. Even if you've got a piano sound you really love, but you want to add synths from the computer, you can just mix those 2 sounds together and have both at the same time if you want. So you could either, teach your keyboard player where the volume control is on the hardware, or you could tell your sound person that you'd like them to do that.
This is so good. So there's really no reason, because it's simultaneous. The backup is already there. It's almost like moving to a digital board and still having your old analog board with all the knobs, with no, there's always risk with electronics, but it pretty much removes the risk. And allows you to explore these new sounds. And the sounds you get from this world it's a whole nother world, right? I mean, the piano sound is incredible. The Rhodes sound, the Whirlies, just the pads are like at another level than this little string pad that you had. Like, it can transform the space, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think so.
Tell us about the sounds. What changes in software-based world? What are the different sounds that we hear? Like, we talk about Whirly or Rhodes. Explain to us what those are, and why they're important.
Sure. Well, I think, we really got to give credit to the musicians and worship leaders who are innovating in published worship music and all of the cool stuff that they're doing to take, music into new creative directions. And all of that stuff, whether it's happening via live recording or in the studio, 90% of it plus is all software based these days. I think probably closer to 98, 99%. So moving to software, first off, just gives you the same potential outcomes that those folks are getting, because we are now using some of the same technology again. It's so that I think just gets you a step closer, because you have the flexibility now to chase after all of those things. Hardware is great when you need really hard limits on what can be done, when you just need it to work and do one thing. Hardware is excellent. But when you want to be able to chase after that inspiring sound or that really cool part or whatever it is that you're going for, software gives you way more flexibility to do that.
So can you give us some different sounds on your setup there? Just start with piano and then dial through some different sounds and give us the name of what you're connecting that with. Because as worship leaders, we might not know what Rhodes or Whirly or organ. We need some authority to be able to speak.
Right.
And even some keyboard players don't know what those sounds are or what they mean. So kind of just walk us through what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll start with piano here. This is a grand piano sound. And there's a little bit of reverb on here. So these sounds are all going to come from within in MainStage.
Okay.
So there's some reverb on here. So this is a sort of a basic, classic grand piano sound that you'd use for any worship song you needed to.
Yeah.
So here's another grand piano, but this one is what we call a smashed grand. And you'd play it the same kind of way. You could do the same things with it, but it's got a bunch of compression on it, which is just a studio effect that changes the way that the piano feels.
That's good.
And it's a subtle difference, but it's like a musical difference. It makes you kind of feel that you're doing something different with the instrument. And this is all over the records you're listening to. And it's inside of software, it's as simple as choosing a different sound or adding a little bit of a compression effect.
Yeah. So how about upright? Give me a little upright.
Yeah,
action.
so here's an upright piano.
Yep. So a little more folksy. Yeah,
a little bit more thin, kind of detuned, like in the room sort of a feeling.
Yeah.
Unplugged almost, Or this is like an even smaller upright piano. This one actually I sampled this one. It's the piano in my mom's house, the piano I learned how to play on.
That's fun. That's awesome. Wow.
So you go from this really intimate sounding piano back to that original grand. And that's big and powerful and filling the space. And then you go to that sort of close, intimate thing.
If I'm going into Revelation song on song 4, there's a certain thing that happens. Maybe this week we've got a cellist and we only have one singer. I might have an opinion of those 4 pianos. I might be able to say, can we try a different piano, David? Or could we try the more woody organic thing? Or do you have something that's a little less bold and maybe a little more transparent, right? So all these conversations can now happen because you've got these crayons in the crayon box, whereas before you had one freaking crayon.
Right.
Now you've got a bunch of crayons, which creates a little bit of problem if you got, depending on who you have, but it does create a little more art and
the cool thing is you've got a volunteer who's maybe just comfortable with basic chords. You can still ask them to bring something different to the table just by choosing a slightly different sound. You play it the same way, but the sound makes it feel a little different. And what I found personally is that over time, those timid volunteers actually start to play a little differently as well, as they feel like the sounds sort of take them in those different directions.
That's so good.
So I'll often say to a volunteer, you can play the same exact thing, play the part, just try a different sound. And they'll say, okay, I'm going to play it the exact same way. But maybe by the second or third time they've played that song, they're actually playing something they've never played before, because they feel like a little license to kind of follow where the sound naturally goes.
So we've done pianos. Let's go through electric pianos. So this would be
some
if
of
I
my
say
favorites.
Rhodes or Whirly.
Yeah.
These in general, what is the tone difference between electric piano and piano?
So, these are all like instruments that were kind of created because pianos were expensive, right? The goal was like, can we make a piano that's more affordable? But they often ended up now they're just their own sort of sound, usually sort of more metallic, sort of bell-like. And Rhodes and Wurlitzer are just two of the most iconic original manufacturers of electric pianos. Very similar in terms of where you can use them, but they each have their own sort of unique feel. So this is a Rhodes. Kind of mellow, really smooth, with just a little bit of bite on the initial attack. So these are great for altar call, for sort of contemplative, like flowy moments, when you just want to let things hang. Great for volunteers who aren't super comfortable playing with a lot of intensity, because the instrument itself is mellow and sounds sort of subdued and relaxed.
And so the extremes, like the bass on that sounds bassy.
Yeah.
Like if you get way down on the keyboard.
Yep. And then the highs are
right. The high just cuts.
Kind of chimey and bell-like. Yep, absolutely. So then,
really good.
Contrasting that, here's a Wurlitzer. I'll play sort of the same thing. It's just, there's a lot of similarity, and there's just sort of a musician's level of difference. They just let you sort of sit. Electric pianos just, I think the most defining characteristic is often that they're just not acoustic pianos, honestly. And that sounds like an obvious statement, but if you find yourself, you're playing 4 songs and they all have piano parts in them, it's really cool as the worship leader to be able to say, hey, you know what? Why don't you just play song 3 with an electric piano instead? Play it the exact same way, play the exact same parts, just change up the sound.
Yeah.
And that sort of is an invitation to, hey, you're contributing something creative and artistic. You're not just playing the piano, but you're playing an instrument that can do all sorts of different things for the team. Those sorts of simple little differences that don't require any additional skill, just permission to be able to pull them up.
That's so good. Yeah, so if you're in like a church where, oftentimes you'll see a keyboardist, like a lot of churches that have more refined musical cultures, it'll be sticks, brushes, mallets, on the mic, off the mic, electric guitar, use your thumb on the bass instead of fingers on the bass. Like the tones, the structures are changing with great instruments and great instrumentalists. And with keyboards, it's really, it is a turn of a knob, and you're going to play it a little different, but it's going to, in a real way, not in a spiritual way, because this word is overused in spirit, it will change the atmosphere, the sonic atmosphere of the room, and it will move the music in a way that other things just aren't going to move it. So those two, Whirly and Rhodes, really nuanced. And then what's left, David? We got Padland, strings.
Padland. Yeah, pads, you got sort of the default warm pad stuff that just sort of sits underneath whatever you're doing. And honestly, if you're trying to transition from just piano sounds to something more, that's the first step to take, is just consider adding a pad in to what you're doing with the piano. And I think that's what people in those older sort of hardware systems get stuck, is, it might not be that easy or intuitive to actually use 2 sounds at the same time. But in modern music, not just in worship music, layering sounds together is really, really common. So that phrase of let's just layer the piano and the pad together. And again, you say that magical phrase, you don't have to play really any differently. You can still just hit the chords. So here's that piano and pad together. So the piano is defining what I'm doing, and the pad is just covering everything that happens afterward for as long as I need it to.
Can you give me 40% less pad?
Yep.
What does that sound like?
Yeah, and in software, you've got control, at that sort of fine-tuned level where you can bring anything up or down. Yeah. As you want to do more, you can make that pad brighter, fill up more space. And, you want to set this up in a way where your volunteers sort of have easy ways to do that kind of stuff. You're going to ask them to do that. You already need to know how to do it, and you need to have taught them how to do it. But then once that's sort of an understood ask, then it's a simple thing, and it doesn't really require any new skill of them, just an understanding of how the system's been put in place.
So, Sunday Sounds is your version of answering that question, right?
Yeah, that's
of how do you make it simpler for a volunteer? Like all this language, you've made it idiot proof,
that's the hope.
That's not your tagline, but idiot proof keys for the local church. So how does that work? How are you interfacing with MainStage?
Our sort of most entry-level resource for keys players that we come up with is called Sunday Keys, and it's what we call a template for keys, and it runs inside of you can do it in MainStage or in Ableton Live if you prefer that software. And the most important ingredients are two things. It has good sounds, one, which is great, but even more importantly than that, it makes it really easy to interact with those sounds, both in preparation and during performance. So instead of just giving you, here's 1,000 great pads, we focus on, here's a small selection of pads that are labeled by what they sound like. And here's a simple way to make sure that no matter what you do, it's going to sound okay. Even if you turn the volume up a little too loud, it's not possible to turn it up so incredibly loud that it's going to hurt somebody's ears, or that you're going to feel like, you failed your worship team during the service. We spend a lot of time. It really came from my own experience of going back to that initial, like, I have a computer, I have a keyboard, I'm going to buy this $9 cable, and now we're going to use MainStage. I was so excited about it, and my volunteers really struggled with learning how to use the software because I didn't really have a system in place for how I would ask them to use it. I would spend a lot of time myself trying to program sounds and come up with cool combinations of instruments, and then I'd give it to them at rehearsal, and they would just look at me like, I've never done this before. How do you expect me to pull this off live?
Sure.
It really wasn't a very volunteer-friendly approach. I was so excited about what the software could do. I really wasn't focused on making it approachable. So over time, I ended up trying to come up with a system for my own worship team and how we would use this software in a way that, a new keyboard player comes along and I can pretty quickly teach them, here's how we use MainStage. Here's a simple system for having, success within this software. That turned into the Sunday Keys template, where it's equal parts sounds that are designed for worship specifically, and then a template or a visual and a way of working within the software that is also designed for worship music. Gotcha. So Sunday Keys comes with a lot of like ready-made sounds where you might have, here's a piano and a nice pad and some strings, and you can just give it to your keys player and let them go. But then also it gives people a way to say, maybe I want to explore a little bit more. Maybe I want to find a cool lead sound because I hear that on the recording. And maybe I could actually find that part and try and do that myself.
That's cool.
Try and meet people where they're at and give them those
So how
next
many
steps.
total patches do you have? Are there dozens? Are there 100? Like, how many have you created over
Sunday
time?
Keys on its own comes with over 200 individual sounds, and that's pianos and pads and organs and strings and synths and all that stuff. And then using those sounds, we also include over 100 ready to play patches that are already kind of pre-layered combinations of sounds that we, as best we can, have tried to dial in for, any type of modern worship context. Yeah. So we've got.
How do you brainstorm what you're going to name those sounds? I've always wondered.
We
do you
mostly
have a dictionary. Do you
we
just
mostly look for the punniest option.
What's your favorite name? You've named a sound.
Oh man, we've got one called Rent Collected, which is like the Rend Collective kind of vibe. I think that's a pretty subtle one, but we're proud of it. Then we've got one that has like a guitar and a bass in it as well. We call that one Be the Worship Team. It's just for when everybody calls in sick, you can just do it all yourself.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for humor and like borderline inappropriate stuff. Like, I just think you could really, you could go the distance,
Well, we're always looking for new names. So you send me an email if you come up with any good ones.
Yeah, you should partner with Worship Leader Problems and what's the Worship Leader Memes, I think.
Yep.
They've got some funny stuff. Like, you could just do some Corona-related ones, political. You could get in a lot of trouble. I mean,
oh man,
we actually want this to succeed. Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to avoid controversy, but
awesome.
Sunday Keys, we get asked if people can use it on Saturday, that sort of thing. So far, we haven't enforced the strict Sundays only policy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like something like One Finger Rock or Soccer Mom Pad. I don't know. If I could just throw some. If you guys need a whiteboard,
all right,
let me
Noted.
know. Well, that's really cool. So, Sunday Keys. I saw a. Not to blow you up too much, but I saw a post today in one of those big worship leader forums. Somebody's asking the question about the problem you're talking about. I need a user-friendly solution, and when people ask that question about like how do I put songs up on the internet, they'll say, they'll use Planning Center. Everybody will be like Planning Center, Planning Center, Planning Center, Planning Center, Planning Center, because that's kind of the standard. And when they posted this, it was like Sunday Keys, Sunday Keys, Sunday Sound, Sunday Sound, And one guy was like, "Here's the pros," or "Here's the pros," and he lists a bunch of stuff. Here's the cons. There are no cons. So obviously it's working and resonating with a lot of churches and solving a problem.
We hope so.
Tools, my goodness. I think that's amazing. So I've got what if I don't want to use my old keyboard and I don't want to buy a $5,000 Nord?
Mm-hmm.
What's in the keyboard land if I was going to buy just a controller or something made to talk to a computer? What are some good options?
Yeah. So you got kind of two ways to go, and they're going to impact your budget. You got to ask yourself, do we need a backup sound like in the keyboard? If do we think the rig's going to crash ever, and is it important to us to have a backup or not? And a lot of churches end up just trusting the software, and a lot of other churches really like to have that backup. I think if you're going to buy it as the main piano or keyboard instrument for your church, it's smart to get something with some built-in sounds, because otherwise, there's a funeral or a wedding.
Yep.
Somebody comes like, "Oh, I really want to play this special song." And then you have to teach that person, here's how you open up MainStage, or you're going to have to be there doing it. And that's probably not what you want to do. So Roland, Yamaha have good mid-level keyboards that have, if it's your backup, you just need a good like piano sound. And these days, even the entry-level ones are going to have decent pianos, probably a pad or two that's usable.
Yeah.
I like the RD88 or the RD series in general from Roland. They're, maybe $1,000 to $2,000 depending on how much they're capable of.
Yeah.
But they're solid, good feel to the controller, which is important if you're going to connect it to the computer. I don't think you really need to spend more than $1,000. The other thing I love to tell people to do is if it's for your backup, if you only need sounds as a disaster scenario, check Facebook Marketplace, check Craigslist, buy something that's 15 years old. Because if it's your, 1 out of 100 services that you need those sounds, all you really need is for it to be well constructed and for the MIDI jack on it to still work.
That's really wise.
So those older keyboards actually are perfect fits for getting a really great controller, because the control, like the quality of the feel of those old keyboards is still great. It's just the sounds haven't aged as well.
That's great.
So if you can be patient, keep an eye.
Tell
Go ahead.
us any hacks on the on the computer side of things. Buying a good enough computer that's going to survive some updates.
Yep.
But anything we can do to prepare that computer to be a church computer for keyboards?
Up until last fall, I always told people to look on the used market and buy, a 3 or 4 year old Mac computer, because Macs are well constructed and they have a good track record of lasting, 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
But in the fall, Apple started releasing their new built-in house M1 computers. Yeah. They're making their own components at a higher level, and they're really, really powerful and some of the most affordable computers that Apple has ever released. So you can actually now run software like MainStage on a MacBook Air or the new Mac Mini, and those start at about $1,000, brand new. So in the past, I'd say, if you spend $800 or $1,000 on a used computer, you're going to be in a good spot. But now we're telling people, look at the newest stuff from Apple, because it's powerful and it's affordable, and with it being brand new, it's going to last a really, really long time. And if you ever want to upgrade down the road, you're going to get more in the resale price because it's not as old.
But if I found a $400 MacBook that's 6 or 7 years old, and I can throw MainStage on there and turn off all the updates.
Yep.
For a minute, like that thing could. I mean, it's going to last for a minute. Like there'll be legacy stuff that'll last for a minute, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, and as long as you've got like a decent amount of memory in there, as long as it's not the absolute bargain basement model, then you're going to be good to go for a while. I started on a 2012 MacBook Pro 13-inch for the first several years. That's what I used up until just a few years ago. So even the older stuff is still good. So if you've got a connection or the ability to find something used, you can get in the door for $400 or $500. Absolutely.
And as far as like standardizing on the stage, we buy a nice keyboard stand, right? For the love of God, double braced, whatever. And a chair, so it can either be sit or standing station. If peripherals, things like I bought this flat stand. It's flat and it's got sticky tape on the top to put my laptop on it.
Oh yeah, sure.
What the peripherals seem to be lacking when we move into keyboard computer land, and computers are sliding all over the place, and there's interfaces. Like, talk to us about the lay of the land of how we could make it just a little more professional.
Yeah, I think that's great. So yeah, I like, laptop stands that are actually designed to hold laptops are a good idea. We recently actually we shot this video comparing how easy it is to knock over a laptop on a music stand versus a laptop stand versus a TV tray as the third option. The TV tray was actually the most stable because it's got 4 legs instead of 3.
Yeah.
So if you're on a tight budget, TV tray with a little bit of non-stick pad on it or something, that can get you going for $20. But a good laptop stand's only, maybe $30 to $50 online from Amazon or something like that. It's a good investment. I would just say the music stand was really easy for us to knock over. Really easy, just like painfully easy. So if you're going to invest in a computer, put a little bit on top to make sure it's not going to get knocked over the first time somebody bumps into it.
That's good.
Good way to protect that
power,
investment.
making sure that there's a power supply that's permanently attached, right?
Yeah. You definitely don't want to run off battery, and you want to try and wire things up so it looks relatively clean, just so that people aren't wondering, like, what's that little space station doing over there in the corner of the stage?
Yeah.
But you notice because you sound good and you're adding to the band, not because of the spaghetti.
That's really good. Well, I just want to ask one more question before we finish up. I think we need a part 2 to kind of go longer into the musicianship and the how do I play, what do I prepare, right? As we get these MP3s, and oftentimes now we're listening to them and we're like, is there any keyboard in here? Like,
right.
What do you want me to do? Like, there's so much we could talk about the musicianship of keyboard and interplay with guitars, but just say how, as keyboard players, how can we process musically when we get the invitation to play and we listen through the songs for our church, our 50-member church, our post-corona 30-member church, our 1,000-member church? How do you determine what you're going to contribute and what you're going to prepare as a keyboardist listening to these church songs?
So am I showing up to a church that I'm familiar with, or am I maybe volunteering for the first time?
Yeah, let's just say it's your church. It's your church with everybody's volunteer and kind of coming at it at the same level.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think if I'm going into a set list with maybe songs that I haven't played with the band before, if they're maybe new to everybody or new to me, I'm a big fan of trying not to torture myself in preparation and really not go. This is what I'll say. When I was first starting with MainStage, I spent way too much time trying to exactly dial things in a certain way, to the point where it just wasn't a joy anymore. There was no excitement in it. There was no real creativity even left in it. It was just sort of a challenge that I had decided I had overcome. Because you can do so much in software, you can get lost and end up being less productive than you could have been if you would have just decided something was good. So I'm a big fan of setting a timer. I'll give myself 20 minutes to rehearse one song and then say, I'm going to work on the sounds. I'm going to work on the key parts that I hear. I'm going to make some notes on the chord chart, and then I'm going to move on. Otherwise, I could spend 3 or 4 hours just dialing in the sweet spot on that pad. That's not fruitful, really. My energy's better spent elsewhere, right? Maybe spending that extra time on the transitions, or maybe having something prepared for altar call or something spontaneous. There's better ways to use my time. So I like to try and not edit myself too much, and just focus on the big picture. The other thing I like to do is really try and listen to just the amount of space that the keys are taking up in any one song. Because when you're working with volunteer musicians, electric guitarists, they're going to add their own interpretation to the guitar parts. Your bass player might not play the bass part the exact same way, but people generally kind of, these days, stick to the sonic space that the original song is sort of carving out for each instrument. So I know that if I can try to be prepared to, let's say the pad needs to just fill out the low mids and sort of glue everything together, I have a lot of creative freedom in that, as long as I make sure I'm kind of in that space. Or maybe a song, like Glorious Day by Passion. It's got all those really great sort of bright synth parts, those Coldplay kind of parts in the right hand. I know that I could do that with a synth lead. I could do that with a piano. As long as I'm in that sort of space, I'm going to not be getting in the way of what everybody else is doing, assuming they're also sort of being mindful of that. So then in a short period of time, I can hopefully get ballpark for those songs. And then when I get to rehearsal, it's just about listening to make sure that everybody else sort of interpreted it the same way or similarly to how, I did, so that we're actually complimenting each other and holding each other up instead of, walking all over each other.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. What's your go-to stance when you're not playing anything at all? Are you a hands in the pocket guy? Are you a thinking man, listening to the singer?
Yeah, it's tough sometimes. I'll be listening to the keys if I'm not careful. Yeah, I'd say, probably eyes closed, hands to the side, like a little sway, My hips are kind of permanently
we
locked.
We got to practice that. Yeah. We need to practice that as keyboard players, as I do master classes, and I tell them I go over, before Corona, I would go and I would lift their arm up from the left-hand side, their left arm up from the piano, so they're only playing the right side.
Right.
And then I would remove their right hand and just stand there and see what happens as the music plays. A lot of times you don't need to do anything. You can just stand there, but you got to learn how to stand, right? You got to shift back and forth and do a little groove and then start to play again,
right.
Whatever it is. But, yeah, that's really good. That's really good on the practice. I like the idea of learning the recording and honoring the recording, but then be willing to completely change it up, mix it up. Like it's not sacred.
Right.
Like the Lord we're worshiping is sacred. He is unchanging, but the record labels and their representation of the songs are not sacred. We could certainly mix those things up, but
how I like to
learn it.
I like to ask myself when I feel like I may be replicating too much, am I playing along with the band right now, or am I playing along to the recording in my head? Because if you have a whole team of people just thinking about the recording when there are actual real people in the room around them, that's when you get like this really weird sort of robo bands that, and I'm not even talking about like tracks or click. I'm talking about if every member of the band is just sort of recalling the recording in the moment instead of feeding off of each other, that regardless of how accurately the parts are or aren't replicated, it's still going to feel sort of like a Stepford Wives, like all the parts are there, but it's just not quite right to listen to, and I've done that before a bunch of times, but you never really notice it until you think like, the guitarist is not Stu G, like that's, that's the guitarist that is a part of my worship team. And what is that man or woman doing right now? How can I support that person in their gift? How can I make space for what they're doing musically, or where can I ask them to support what I'm doing musically?
It's really good. Yeah, serving others in the band and on the team and serving the song. There's so many places where we're doing that. That's really good. Oh, David, that's so good, man. Thanks for giving us lots of gear, thoughts and ideas and software. And I hope a lot of us, if you've not lived in any software world with keyboards, I think Sunday Sounds is going to be super easy for you to get into that world, right? Through MainStage and through others. So I encourage you to check it out. What's the website? It's sundaysounds.com, right?
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. And you said Sunday Keys. Is that another product, or that's just...
Yeah, so Sunday Keys is our entry-level template for worship keys players. So if somebody's brand new and wants to kind of hit the ground running, that's where we point them.
That's so awesome. Cool. Well, you guys check that stuff out. See what David's doing. If you have questions, obviously you can contact David. Contact us at Vineyard School of Worship. We hope to have David back. And we've had Joy, one of his, what would you call her? She was an employee, or she's
an employee.
You?
Yep.
Okay.
She's with us,
she did some keyboard stuff with us in one of our Training Tuesday videos. So hope to have David back for more of that and our different events. We always try to bring some keyboard love to what we're doing, because there's so many questions. We've answered so many questions in the worship world about drums and singers and songwriting. I feel like the keyboard arts are the final frontier for us to really, or the next frontier for us to really explore and answer some questions and solve some problems on our stages, to figure things out. So thanks for helping us do that. Thanks for removing obstacles for the church and giving us tools to help people encounter God and worship him. So it's awesome. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. It's been great being here.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining the Ferment Takeover. We know this is a lot more practical than we normally do on the Ferment. It's about worship and transformation, and we're definitely leaning on the worship side of it. But we pray and hope that God is continuing to transform your life personally as you worship and prepare for your weekends. And we just thank you so much. Thanks, Adam, for making space for the Takeover Vineyard School of Worship. We're going to have lots of events throughout the summer and the fall, and we're looking forward to seeing you guys, hopefully on Zoom and maybe in person. So until then, take care.
Hey everyone, Casey Coram here, producer of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. First of all, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media. Instagram at Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.